I'm ending the Portless challenge, okay? A lot of things have changed, and I am not one for having a super reliable track record. There's a lot of things I predict that end up happening, but there's also a lot of things I predict that don't end up happening. And I definitely owe you guys an explanation as to why I'm officially just calling it quits and saying, not doing the Portless challenge anymore, and why I think it's unnecessary for us to keep trying to do inductive only on everything. I'm admitting I'm wrong, okay? Yay, yay, Drew's wrong. Okay, let's begin. So there were a lot of things that have taken place over the past few years that have led me to this realization, but for those who may not remember, back when the iPhone 8 Plus first was delivered to me back in September of 2017, that's when I started the Portless challenge. That's when I decided, you know what, I'm not really using the lightning cable for very much in the first place, and at the time, Apple had pretty recently just removed the headphone jack, so I was kind of on that train that, hey, Apple doesn't like ports in general, and one day they'll probably even remove the charging port in favor of inductive charging only, and wireless charging will be the future, and that's where all tech, or mobile tech, is mostly going to end up. So ever since that day I started using the iPhone 8 Plus, I made an effort to never have to use wires with my phone anymore. That meant airdropping all of my footage, restoring everything, of course, from iCloud backups, and charging exclusively with Qi chargers. And I had to say, the challenge was pretty simple. I found it fairly easy to just buy a couple wireless chargers in places where you find yourself often, a couple wireless charging battery banks, and pretty much you're good to go. You can put a wireless charger on your desk, on your nightstand, and then have that battery pack for when you're out and about, and you'll never really need to use that lightning cable ever again. My main reason for doing this was to prepare myself. My thought process was that in the future, just like Apple removed the headphone jack, they would probably end up removing the charge port. And while I still believe that's going to happen, I also think it's a lot further away than I made it out to be. See, when I first saw wireless charging take off in the iPhones and watch it become more of a standard, as there were a lot of iPhone users that were utilizing the wireless charging technology, and Apple promoting it, especially with AirPower, and showcasing that, hey, this is the future of wireless tech. And also companies that were hyping up the idea of over-the-air charging, like Pi, which turned out to not really have anything. It was just kind of a scam in a way, or not really a scam, they didn't charge money, but it was more of a trick. They were trying to trick people into thinking that they had developed over-the-air charging, which in all technicality it does exist, but it's nowhere near efficient enough and capable enough for it to actually start charging our phones. There's concepts that have been around for years, but none of them have ever turned into something real. But back in 2017, when AirPower was first announced and wireless charging was first being introduced, I thought it was somewhat believable that within 2 to 3 years, we would start seeing charging that was capable across the room, or you would install things in the ceiling that could charge your phone, and you could just walk into a room and have your devices start charging. Turned out to not be that simple, and we've definitely not seen too much development in that space other than, you know, regular inductive charging being faster, but no, not over the air. And there's a whole other assortment of problems I completely understand with removing the charge port entirely. For having to do restores and backups, you have to make sure that everything firmware on the phone is locked and ready to go and will never crash and will never need a hard reset, because once you start removing critical ports like that, it becomes very, very difficult to boot up again or restore again if something goes wrong with the wireless technology. So I can totally get why Apple is hesitant to remove that, and also showcasing that they kind of care about the performance and the lightning port in this generation's iPhones. This was kind of the final nail in the coffin for me, but I figured for the longest time Apple didn't care about fast charging very much because they didn't want to include it with their phones, and they probably thought inductive was the future anyway, so they wanted to move more people onto that. But as we discovered that AirPower was a lot more complicated than Apple made it out to be, this future of having a giant wireless charge mat that you'll drop your phone, AirPods, watch, or even your iPad or your MacBook onto, and you can just have giant powered desks to inductively charge all your devices, that future turned out to be a lot further away than we all thought. I still don't think it's impossible. I think all that tech may come out one day, but it is not this day. And I mean, think about how long now Apple has adopted Lightning in their iPhones. We've had Lightning in our iPhones before we've had Biomet. biometrics. Ever since the iPhone 5, Apple has used this reversible, very, very thin port, which is pretty good at transferring power and data, and at the time it was announced there was really no other ports like it, but since then we've had giant revolutions in USB-C, and Apple is still hesitant to adopt to that. But the reason I want to make today's video is because I also want to change my viewpoint that I've had in the past and go on the record saying I think it's more likely for Apple to adopt USB-C on their iPhones than it is for them to ditch the charging port entirely. And Apple commits to their charging ports. They know the biggest reason for Apple to not adopt USB-C is they have a huge audience, they have a huge demographic of people that have been using Lightning for a long time, and they have a ton of Lightning accessories, and as soon as the latest iPhone changes ports again, all of those old cables and accessories finally become useless, and they have to go buy adapters, dongles, or new cables, and that's gonna upset people. Even though us in the tech community, us nerds, we all love USB-C, we all want USB-C on everything, we're not the everyday consumer, and the everyday consumer is gonna get way more annoyed at that port switching than the rest of us are. Personally, me, I don't care. I have tons of USB-C cables. If my iPhone sported USB-C, my lineup would be far more consistent. But because wireless charging technology didn't take off the way I thought it would, and we didn't really get to see that AirPower or AirPower Max charger I used to daydream about, where we could just drop all of our mobile devices on this one big mat and have them charge, I'm starting to think that the wireless future is a lot further away than I made it out to be. And I've also proven my point. You know, the main point I wanted to make with the Portless challenge was that you could live pretty comfortably without using the charging port. And several years in review, I've experienced that to be true. It was pretty easy. I just had to get a couple Qi chargers, which aren't really that much money, and put them in places where I spend a lot of my time. It's still very convenient, and I'm not saying I'm going exclusively back to wired charging. I'm still gonna use wireless charging probably 95% of the time. The only point I'm trying to make is on those rare days or rare occasions where maybe my battery's really low and I want to take advantage of fast charging, now I'm not going to hesitate like I did in the past. So with the battery life of the 11 Pro Max, I don't think that's gonna happen very often, but regardless, now I'm just kind of bored of the concept of like, okay, you know, you don't have to plug anything into your iPhone. It's pretty easy. I've done it for several years now, just dropping on Qi chargers, airdropping, iCloud backup. There's no reason to plug in anymore, and if I cannot plug anything into my iPhone for a solid 2 years plus, then I think it's safe to say it's possible. Apple could remove the charge port on the next iPhone, even though I find that incredibly unlikely, but even if they did, it wouldn't bother me. I know what it's like to live wirelessly, and I know that this thing is not a crucial feature for me to have in my phones. But now I'm kind of curious to do the exact opposite of what I did with my iPhone XS Max. You guys know I didn't plug anything into that phone. I used it with Qi chargers exclusively, and almost for the entire year I owned that phone, the battery health was at 100%. 3 days before I got the 11 Pro Max, the battery health finally dropped down a little bit, so I know that Qi charging is pretty healthy for your battery, given I knew a lot of people with the XS Max that experienced battery health go down when they used fast chargers throughout the year. So I could make that point of like, hey, I want to preserve battery health, so that's why I use Qi charging. But now, with the insanely good battery life of the 11 Pro Max, I could shave off probably a good 5 to 10% of this battery and still make it through the day, no problem. So I'm almost like devil's advocate wanting to just exclusively fast charge this thing and see how it ages after a year of use. I know I'm getting next year's iPhone anyway, so even if I fry the battery on this thing, it's not really gonna make that big an impact because it'll still probably have a better battery life than my XS Max did at 100%. So I guess the big takeaway in this video is you could say I'm bored with the challenge. Okay, I get it. I can live without cables, but now I just want to see what kind of damage can I do to the battery. And the other reason is a lot of people just keep bringing it up. They're like, hey Drew, when you reviewed the smart battery case, you ruined the Portless challenge. I'm like, look, the reason I reviewed the smart battery case is because it's from Apple and it had battery optimization features. If Apple removed the charge port on the iPhone, obviously they wouldn't sell a battery case with a charge port. They would do it through Qi. So to me, that doesn't really count because in the event that they remove the charge port, the battery case would follow with it. The point being that you could live comfortably and easily without the charge port, and I'm still going to. I'm probably not going to exclusively fast charge this thing, but maybe for a couple weeks or a couple months at a time, it'll be a fun test to just say, yeah, no more Qi charging. I'm just going to exclusively fast charge and see what happens. So in conclusion, it's a rethinking of the future because of the past 2 years, how things have gone and how wireless really hasn't taken off. For two, I've made my point. You can live comfortably without the charge port if you want want to, but if the port's gonna be there anyway, and Apple's likely going to adopt USB-C at some point, I don't know if it's next year, it might be, it might not be, but Apple likes supporting their ports for a long time. So once they get to USB-C, they'll probably keep it around for a good, 7-8 years before they ditch it entirely. Again, I still want to be on the record and say that one day they'll probably remove it, but it's definitely not going to be soon. Anyway, let me know what you guys think of me ending the Portless challenge in general, or do you have a desire to go back to Lightning or to try out the Portless challenge for yourself? Let me know what you're thinking about hitting me up over on Twitter or joining our Discord. This is your Apple Sheep here. I will see you guys in the next one.